Welcome to Now It's History. I'm delighted to have as my guest today Ed O'Keefe. We worked together at CNN, and he went on to write a fascinating book called The Loves of Theodore Roosevelt, The Women Who Created a President, and then in his day job to be CEO of the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library. And this year, you may have noticed the New York Times did its annual list of 52 places tourists should visit around the world. And one of them was Medora, North Dakota. And Ed is here to tell us why.
Well,
Ed?
it's a pleasure to be with you, Rich. Good to talk with you again after our CNN days. Well, why should someone visit North Dakota and Medora in particular? Because it is going to be the home of the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library. It is already home to Theodore Roosevelt National Park, the only park named for a person, not a place. And as of July 4th, 2026, a mere 100 days or so from now, it will also be home to the first and only presidential library dedicated to the life and legacy of Theodore Roosevelt. It's also home to a fabulous musical every summer, the Medora musical. So it's a bit of a tourist destination as it is. The 65 million years of geologic history that encompass the Badlands are an incredibly beautiful place. This is a wonderful location for a family road trip and to go explore the great American West. You go hiking, biking, horseback riding, go up on top of our 38-foot tall roof and get a 360-degree view of the Badlands around you. You know, a 100,000 square foot facility that's going to have about a third of it dedicated to immersive theatrical exhibits that engage the head, the hands, and the heart. And we're on 93 acres of what is essentially an open public park that invite you to go out and explore the landscape that literally saved the life of Theodore Roosevelt when he was mourning and recovering from a very low point in his life.
Now, Ed, there's a personal aspect to this, which is that you're from North Dakota. So talk a little bit about your growing up there and your connection to the Badlands.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of growing up in Grand Forks, North Dakota, which is on the far eastern side of the state and almost to the Canadian border. So I grew up in the exact opposite side of the state from where we are building the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library. The TR Library is in Medora, North Dakota, which is about 20 miles from the Montana border. So about as far west as you can go in the state before being in the next state. But as a kid, I loved to travel out there with my family. We'd visit Theodore Roosevelt National Park. We'd go to the Medora musical every summer. You know, it's a magical kind of place. It has a almost mysticism to it. I like to say that when you're in the East, you feel the presence of Theodore Roosevelt's ghost. But when you're in the West, when you're in the Badlands, you feel the presence of Theodore Roosevelt's spirit. Every year, you know, anytime I'm back, you'll encounter somebody who's going through a hard time in life, just like TR did. You know, maybe they're going through a divorce or they have someone who's sick in their family. They've gone through a personal medical crisis of their own. And there's a solace and a peace to this place where you can gaze out into the landscape and feel that connection that TR did with nature. And so that, you know, I love to travel there as a kid. When I left CNN in 2018, I began the research for the loves of Theodore Roosevelt, found myself steeped in all things Roosevelt, and I was thinking about what to do next in my career. And so this opportunity to lead the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library, which at that point was really just an idea and needed an architect, land, and money. Other than that, it was a sure thing. It just felt like an irresistible opportunity to reconnect with a place that was very important to my childhood and upbringing and something that we could share even more greatly with the world.
Of course, there was a famous quote about the Badlands that it's hell without the fires, or hell with the fires out.
Hell with the fires out. Very vivid description. Yes.
But I understand there is smoke sometimes when lightning will strike a coal seam.
That's right. The coal seams, in fact, at Theodore Roosevelt National Park, they still to this day track about 5 to 8 active coal streams, coal veins that are actively on fire. I mean, this intense heat and fire will actually form almost a clay-like material, and that's what creates these incredibly varied geologies and colors. I mean, the we one of the main features of the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library is a rammed earth wall, which is a almost one of the most ancient architectural practices in the world. Indigenous tribes would have used rammed earth to build some of their early homes. Of course, we also have a sod roof, which is another material you would have used in years and eons past. And it's really emulates that strata, that color pattern that there are these reds and browns and almost purple hues. I mean, Theodore Roosevelt described it as the Badlands look as Edgar Allan Poe writes. Not exactly an optimistic tone from him in the middle of his depression, but it is, as he said, a grotesque almost landscape. It looks like you're on the surface of another planet. Petrified forest and the scoria that you're going to encounter, the variations in color, and the just enormous amount of variation in the geography and topography. So it's really it's a beautiful, special place. We were honored to be on not only the New York Times best places to visit in 2026, but also some of the best places in the world to visit by National Geographic, Lonely Planet, and Smithsonian Magazine, who noted this is one of the best places to celebrate America's 250th birthday. So somebody out there's got it right. They've figured out our little secret, and this is a wonderful place to spend some time with your family and getting back to nature.
How did TR fall in love with the beauty of the Badlands?
Well, that's a great question, Rich. So, first encounter with what would become North Dakota, it was then Dakota Territory, was actually on a hunting trip with his brother on what would have been considered his bachelor party. They got very close to what would be modern day Fargo and spent the night in a homestead where the wind was rattling so badly outside that he had to huddle for the night under a buffalo skin. And that was the far eastern part of the state. He was intrigued. And as they built the transcontinental railroad in the north part of the country, this was literally Medora was as far as the train would travel before the Golden Spike and the connection through to the Pacific Northwest. So he came back out in 1883 and really and visited Medora for the first time to hunt a buffalo, to hunt a bison. And while he was there, he inherited half of, excuse me, he invested half of his inheritance, $14,000, hundreds of thousands, almost millions today, in cattle. And so he spent 10 days there hunting. And if you read the letters that he sends back to his wife, Alice Hathaway Lee, you wouldn't think he's having a very good time because it's pouring rain and he gets bucked off the horse in such a way that the butt of the gun gashes his forehead and there's blood running down everywhere. He finally corners a bison and he startles it and misses. But he thinks this is just spectacular. This is TR. So the harder the conditions and the rougher the go of it, the more I think he was able to live out in his imagination the strenuous life. He was able to do what he'd only read about. He was able to live his curiosity that he read about in books. And so it had a desolate kind of loneliness, but also a necessity for you to work together with the ranchers and cowboys. I mean, you had to, you know, you had to toe your end of the saw, right? Your worth was not measured in your wealth. It was measured in the sweat equity of what you were able to do to survive. And I think, coming from the elite circles that he did in New York, this was just a very different way of being. And I mean, when he said that, you know, that my experiences in North Dakota, I would not be president if not for my experiences in North Dakota. It was a political statement, but it was also true. I mean, this place, this landscape quite literally saved him at a moment where he could have given up and not found his way forward. So he fell in love with the land, with the freedom, with the people, with the hard work mentality, and the challenge that this landscape posed to a life that he'd otherwise lived in relative luxury.
It seemed to have saved him in two ways. One is physically, he had asthma and a weak heart, but also emotionally, he suffered the loss of his wife, his first wife, and his mother on the same day in New York City.
Well, absolutely. I mean, let's take physically first. I mean, the first words of the loves of Theodore Roosevelt, the women who made a president, are from the beginning, the survival of Theodore Roosevelt was very much in doubt. His mother did not believe that he would live beyond 4 or 5 years old, which was very common in that time, unfortunately, that you might lose a child in childhood to disease or asthma. And he's growing up in a smog-filled environmental disaster in New York, right? I mean, horse and carriage times and coal, big, thick, velvet kind of curtains and such in this ornate Victorian home. I mean, he probably was choked for life. His mother would literally massage his chest until the blood came out in these severe asthmatic attacks. Asthma doesn't go away. I mean, he had it his whole life, but when he was out in nature, when he was out in the freedom of the Badlands, he could breathe again. And I think that there was nothing equal to the work that he did and the strenuous engagement that made him feel and actually made him stronger. So that physical transformation was very, very real. I mean, he was able, as we talked about, to finally live the life he'd only read about in his books, um, and lived in his imagination, but he was doing it for real out in the Badlands. And too, emotionally, he arrives in the Badlands again in 1884 after losing his wife and his mother on the same day in the same house, February 14th, 1884. He writes an X in his diary, "The light has gone out of my life." And the next page of that diary, incidentally, says, "For essentially, for better or worse, my life has been lived out." So he really does not know what he's going to do with his life. He's 25 years old. He's lost his father 6 years earlier. He's lost his wife and his mother. He's learned that very tough lesson that unfortunately many of us learn in life, that life is extraordinarily fragile. Death can come at any time, regardless of your social status or your wealth. And yet, going out into the Badlands and challenging himself to live on the land and with the ranchers and the cowboys who were so dissimilar to him really did emotionally give him the time to mourn the passing of those family members that were gone, but also make a decision that he was going to live. I mean, when I started to do my research, I initially posited that he must have had a death wish because he goes out into the Badlands of North Dakota and he'll chase after strayed horses for 40 miles without hat or gloves and get stuck in a blinding snowstorm only to survive by coming across a Texan cowboy who knows where they can hold up for the night. I mean, that's just not safe or smart. He crosses the Little Missouri River at such a speed and ferocity that you think at any moment this guy is going to topple over and drown. He confronts three thieves who steal his dugout boats, and by at gunpoint takes them in to the sheriff in Dickinson and turns them in. I mean, you know, these are not the actions you would think are. He's risking his life for the first time in a real and meaningful way. But I don't think he had a death wish. I think he had seen the fragility of existence. He knew that death could take you at any time, and he was determined to live out his life at the fullest tilt that he could. He famously said later, it's better to wear out than to rust out, and it really was from that moment onward that he lived that credo.
Yeah, very interesting. It seems like there's a sort of seam of recklessness that runs through his life, including the charge up the hill in Cuba, and but also the women around him who you focus on in the book, in which you tell their story so eloquently. In a way, they were his regulators, governors, whatever you want to call it. They kept him out of more trouble than he had already gotten himself into.
Yeah, well, let's take them one by one. I mean, first, there's Mitty, his mother, who has been written off in history as largely inconsequential, that she collapsed under the weight of the Civil War and the loss of her husband far too young. I don't see it that way. I see a very strong, independent, lively, charismatic woman. She was raised in the South in Georgia. She marries a Northerner, moves to New York. She moves her mother and her sister in with the Roosevelt family. So Theodore Roosevelt is growing up with not just his mother and his two sisters, but also his grandmother and his aunt, three of them Southern devoted Confederates in the middle of the Civil War. So he's literally growing up in a house divided, in a nation divided, right? He is seeing his parents disagree without being disagreeable. They are on opposite sides of one of the most vitriolic issues in American history, and yet they're able to stay together as a family. I mean, his mother was a big personality. She's the inspiration for Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind. That's pretty much all you need to know about Mitty Bullock Roosevelt. And she tells these stories. You know, she teaches her children empathy and storytelling, how to connect with people on a genuine human level. And after the death of Theodore Roosevelt's father, it is Mitty who says to the children, you need to live for the living and not for the dead. If you do not live a life of purpose, you will dishonor the memory of your father. So you think about two of the things we know about Theodore Roosevelt, this big personality, a storyteller who could really connect and empathize with people who were different than himself, and his ability to, as we discussed, Rich, to will himself through physical and emotional pain. Those are qualities he learned from his mother, Mitty. He's got an older sister, Bammy, and a younger sister, Connie. And then, of course, his two wives. We've referenced Alice Hathaway Lee, who sadly died very early in their marriage. They were only together a total of 6 years. And then his wife, Edith, who became the first lady and really was his first love. We could talk about each of them, but each of them played a different and important role, exactly as you said, Rich, as a regulator, as an encourager, as somebody who moderated his influences and his propensities, his tempestuous nature. So, he really was the product of these extraordinary women who each played a very key role in who Theodore Roosevelt became.
Would you say that Edith, his second wife, was first among equals in terms of having an impact on TR?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, first of all, you couldn't have one man marry two diametrically different people in the space of several years than Alice Hathaway Lee and Edith Kermit Roosevelt, Edith Kermit Carew, before she was married. So let's just quickly say of Alice that, again, she too, like Mitty's, been written off in history, but her story is much more complicated and interesting than has been written. There were 24 love letters that were not available to Edmund Morris when he wrote the brilliant trilogy, beginning with The Rise of Theodore Roosevelt, or to David McCullough when he wrote Mornings on Horseback. And those love letters, those letters between Theodore and Alice, show a much more complex relationship. He, in his own words, talked with her about everything from politics to poetry. I mean, his senior thesis in college, under the influence of Alice and her family, endorses suffrage. 40 years before the 19th Amendment, says women should be doctors, lawyers, and judges, calls for women to own property and to not necessarily take their husband's name upon marriage. But it's Edith, who was really his first love and his second wife. They are dating all throughout their childhood. Everyone expects them to get engaged. When Edith comes of age, they have a mysterious, explosive fight, break up on August 22nd, 1878. And just
And
a couple
that was
months
at
later,
Sagamore Hill, or what?
that's right. And at the
Yeah,
ironically named Tranquility, was
yeah,
anything but tranquil when the Roosevelts were there, and certainly
yeah,
not on
yeah,
August 22nd, 1878. But
yeah.
enter Alice for a period, she passes away, and then re-enter Edith. Edith, to your question, Rich, is absolutely TR's equal. Let's just barrel through some of the accomplishments. I mean, she's the first lady to have a social secretary. Now, that might not seem like a gigantic achievement, but they entertained over 40,000 people his first year in the White House. And she was the one who really systemized the office of First Lady. Every First Lady subsequent to Edith has had a social secretary, and really is the beginning of organizing the First Lady's office as an official function of the government, not just an ornamental spouse. She is, she renovates the White House. She works with McKim, Mead, and White, the famed architects of the age, to create what became the East Wing and is no longer the East Wing, and to create the executive parts of the mansion, to rename it the White House, to put the First Lady's portraits on display, to collect the china from previous First Ladies, to establish the White House China collection. She plants a colonial garden that became the Rose Garden. Beyond these, she also put her office next to Theodore Roosevelt. So, as I say in The Loves of Theodore Roosevelt, she was in the room where it happened because she designed it that way. She was his counselor and advisor, read 4 to 5 newspapers every morning, the ones that he wasn't reading, so they could talk about his personal and political options. She advised him on appointments. She was universally known as a better judge of character. I mean, to a person, if you look at the record around him, because she burned much of their correspondence, that the cabinet and people knew that if you wanted to get to Theodore and you wanted him to make a decision in the way you wanted him to make it, the best thing you could do was convince Edith. Immensely, immensely influential behind the scenes in his life.
There was a detail, speaking about his first wife, Alice, in your book that I don't think has been elsewhere, which was this lock of hair that was found at Sagamore Hill, right?
That's correct. So again, the lore as it has been written is that Alice Hathaway Lee, who becomes TR's first wife, dies essentially in childbirth and is forgotten. That Edmund Morris, very cruelly, in my opinion, sort of says in The Rise of Theodore Roosevelt that the best thing Alice ever did for TR was to leave, was to die, because now he could live a life of consequence, and though this was emotionally difficult, he would propel himself forward. That is not true. He of course named his daughter Alice after his first wife. Now, granted, he was reluctant to use that name and would come up with nicknames like Sister or Baby Lee to avoid saying the name Alice. I think the memory of his first wife was so painful that he didn't like revisiting her memory. However, when I was researching The Loves of Theodore Roosevelt, I worked with the team at Sagamore Hill, the National Historic Site, including Laura Cinturati, the park ranger who worked there at the time, and decided, look, Alice disappeared off the face of the earth at essentially the age 22, almost 23 years old. There's not much of a record for her. I want to see anything that is hers. We looked at books that were given to her as Christmas gifts by her mother. We looked at corsages and anything. And as we're looking through the record, we see this entry that says Alice Lee hair, 9 months. And, it seemed like it was going to be the hair of a baby that you might keep as a keepsake. Parents do this to this day. We've done this with our children, and we pull it out, and there's a sort of almost Tiffany-like colored box. It's a bluish green, and we open it up, and indeed there on the top are the locks of Alice's hair from when she was a baby. But we see there's something else underneath. So we open up this second secret chamber almost, and underneath are 16 inches of Alice's hair with a note in the unmistakable handwriting of Theodore Roosevelt that says, "The hair of my sweet wife, Alice, cut after death." Theodore Roosevelt kept this, which was common in the Victorian age, a keepsake of your lost loved one, uh, along with his favorite photographs of her. And he hid this box away from Edith the rest of her life. So you have physical evidence to refute the idea that he never wanted to or remembered this painful memory of his first life. It was actually his daughter, also named Alice, who later said that she believed that Edith never forgave Theodore his first marriage, and that there were three people in her parents' marriage. There was her stepmother, her father, and the ghost of her 22-year-old mother.
And of course, that's just one of Alice Longworth's, the daughter's, remarkable observations, which run through much of 20th century history. But you want to talk a little bit about the role she played when she grew
Uh,
up?
Alice Roosevelt Longworth, right? Princess Alice, the originator of Alice Blue, one of the most popular colors of the age, still used in the Pantone collection today.
Mhm.
She was a pistol her entire life. First born in 1884, last to die in 1980. She knew every president from her father all the way through Gerald Ford. She consulted and advised almost every single one of those presidents. She was universally known in the press as the other Washington Monument. She had a pillow on her couch that said, "If you have nothing nice to say, come and sit by me." She's really the living embodiment of Theodore Roosevelt and his first wife, Alice. It gives you some sense of insight into what Alice, his first wife, must have been like by knowing this great personality, Alice Roosevelt Longworth. She, it was of Alice that Theodore, as president, said, "I can either run the country or I can control Alice, but I cannot possibly do both." And upon hearing this, Alice shot back, "Well, that's interesting. My father likes to be the bride at every wedding, the corpse at every funeral, and the baby at every baptism." So she could give as good as she got, but they had a complex and interesting relationship. I mean, she married the Speaker of the House, Nicholas Longworth, for whom the Longworth Building is named at the House of Representatives today. She got married in the White House. She had a beautiful, fantastic White House wedding. She served as one of his ambassadors, essentially, in Japan after the settlement of the Russo-Japanese War, which many Japanese were upset about because they felt they didn't get the terms they rightly, in their minds, deserved. And she was a key advisor in the 1912 race when he ran as a progressive bull moose independent. So they had a very, fascinating and complex relationship, of course, all grounded in that tragic moment where he lost his wife and she lost her mother, whom she would never know.
You had I should say, the Theodore Roosevelt Museum had a fascinating panel discussion a few weeks ago with Doris Kearns Goodwin and Ted Roosevelt V. And Doris pointed out that TR is incredibly relevant today. When you think of vast inequality, income inequality, and wealth inequality, when you think about immigration as an issue, and you think about the muscular foreign policy and the Monroe Doctrine and Cuba and Venezuela, so much of the issues that TR dealt with in a very forceful way are still with us or have returned in some form or another. I'm curious what you think about his relevance to our current time.
Well, history doesn't repeat, it rhymes, right? That's the old Mark Twain saying. And exactly as you've laid out, Rich, and Doris and her conversation with Ted, which is available as a podcast on Good Citizen, hosted by Theodore Roosevelt V. So if you enjoy this conversation, you'll very much enjoy that conversation. Think about the economics, the economy, right? In TR's time, you're changing from an agrarian to an industrial society. He's born in 1858. By the time he's president, he'll be the first president in a airplane, in a motorcade, first to drive a car, first to use a telephone, to have a transatlantic wire, first in a submarine, and the first president to travel abroad. He's the president at first because technology is uprooting society and changing not only the economy, but people's relationship to the present and their fondness for the analog past. Does any of this sound familiar, right? You mentioned immigration. Absolutely. There's an enormous immigration debate. Of course, this is the era of Irish need not apply. Germans and Italians and Europeans, Chinese and Chinese exclusion acts. It will lead, not in TR's time, but shortly after him, to one of the biggest crackdowns in immigration in U.S. history that will last about 30, 40 years. So from the economy to the immigration stance to, the debate about America's place in the world. You mentioned the corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, his intervention in Panama. I mean, Panama didn't exist as a country. He wanted to do the Panama Canal with Colombia. When Colombia wouldn't cooperate, he essentially supported an insurrection, created a new country, and said, I left Congress not to debate the canal, but to debate me. And so yeah, I think he remains culturally relevant as well. I mean, the in the arena speech LeBron James puts on his shoes before every basketball game. Miley Cyrus has a tattoo of that speech she shares with Liam Hemsworth. There's not a lot of presidential speeches you're going to find tattooed on celebrities' forearms. So, I mean, I think he's prescient and culturally relevant and certainly politically relevant because he almost seems like he's a man from the future. I mean, he's thinking 100 years. He's constantly saying that he's taking these actions not for the present generation, but for our children and our children's children. That's really the guiding principle of conservation. I mean, conservation as a political concept didn't exist. There was no opposing side or other argument in his time when he proposed his first conservation actions. The Speaker of the House said there will not be one dime for scenery. That was the perception is the land is there to be utilized and developed. There is no such thing as conservation. So I think, the past is always prescriptive of how we could better understand the present and potentially make a better future. But it's more so in Theodore Roosevelt's case because he was so constantly fixated on the future that he does feel like he's predicting the debates that we're going to have and takes a very strong stance in his time. I never like to take him out of his time to wonder what he would think of events now, but he certainly set the stage for what would become the American century and set the stage for a lot of the debates that we continue to have.
So this year, there's another presidential library opening,
Yeah.
and it's in Chicago. And it's the
Yeah.
Obama Library, and very different in conception and form to the TR one that you're opening. But when you think about it, Obama left the White House about 10 years ago. It took a century for us to get a TR library. Why?
Well, first of all, kudos to the Obama Presidential Center. They're opening to the public on Juneteenth, June 19th. We opened to the public on July 4th. I don't think there's another occasion in U.S. history where two presidential libraries have opened within 2 weeks of one another, nor do I think it's possible to imagine two presidential libraries with two presidents separated by a century opening within 2 weeks. So I think it's really special. And they're in Chicago and we're in Medora. So if you want to check off all of the presidential libraries on your list, now you've got two more to add to the checklist. I think it took a long time. One, because Theodore Roosevelt predates the presidential library system. So it was the tradition at that time for the presidential papers to be the personal property of the president. A lot of them donated some that they selected to the Library of Congress or to their alma mater. In Theodore Roosevelt's case, that was Harvard and Columbia, although he never graduated from Columbia. And, his archive and record is spread across 33 different institutions and private collectors all over the world. So, the idea of a library being the repository and archives of a presidential paper, the president's papers, really began under FDR. We are creating Theodore Roosevelt's archive in AI. We're working with the Theodore Roosevelt Center at Dickinson to digitize his archive and make it available to the world in partnership with Microsoft as well. And so I think there's a really interesting opportunity to take a figure from history and make those archives universally not only searchable but interactive. It's extraordinary. I mean, you mentioned Doris Kearns Goodwin, who is a trustee of our board. She is using this AI as part of her research into future books, and it's knitting together. You might have a letter that TR wrote that it is in the Harvard collection, and then the response is in the Library of Congress. Well, unless you go there or they have digitized them both and you have a way to unify them, it's hard to put those pieces of the puzzle together. Well, now with this tool, instantaneous. I think it's going to lead to a whole bunch of fourth graders doing their first book report, to the next Doris Kearns Goodwin's writing their Pulitzer Prize winning books about Theodore Roosevelt. It'll lead to a whole lot more scholarship and information and interest about him. And then just, practically speaking, it's not really a library, right? I mean, it's more of a call to adventure and action. We are using the example of Theodore Roosevelt to inspire the next generation of leaders, citizens, and conservationists. We want people to come with their families, want kids to drag their parents to this museum. And the interactive exhibits are almost theatrical. They're meant to evoke a feeling or a value. So when you're in the Roosevelt Museum of Natural History, his boyhood home, you're going to open a book and an extinct species of bird is going to fly out and join a wall of wonder. When you're going down the Amazon, you're surrounded by 4D experience where you're going to feel those rapids, the piranhas, the danger of that misadventure. When you're in the arena speech, you're going to be surrounded by 15 feet tall letters of this incredible speech that has inspired everyone from every president subsequent to TR to LeBron James, right? And so it's meant to be a way for you to think about your own place in not just the country, but the world, global citizens, and how you want to be in the arena of your own life. How do you want to be the change that you want to see in the world? And then, of course, a celebration of nature. So I think it took 100 years because there's this very pragmatic answer about his place within the presidential library system. And this other more aspirational answer, which is really that this is the time to create something that reminds people of, a president who really, I mean, Republicans, Democrats, independents, everyone loved him because he stood for the people and he really wanted to challenge you as a precept of his life to get in the arena, to not be on the sidelines, to not be a critic, to be somebody who stood for what you believed in, fought for it in civic life. And that's what we're trying to create, to really learn not just about, but from that example of Theodore Roosevelt.
And what is going to be happening on July 4th?
Ah, well, we're opening to the public. I mean, there'll be an official dedication on July 4th. Tickets go on sale to the general public on March 30th. If you're a member of the TR Library, you get early access. We have inaugural memberships for the TR Library on sale now. And one of the perks of membership is that you're able to have early and first access to not only our ticket sales, but to the museum and everything that you can experience out in North Dakota and on our platform, as I mentioned. And we're going to really be doing, we're an America 250 celebration site. We're taking part in that nationwide celebration. You're going to have New York and Washington and Philadelphia and then Medora. Which one of these is not like the other? And it's really going to be, not just a celebration of Theodore Roosevelt, but a celebration of the American West, of this kind of entrepreneurial spirit that exists in America, the daring and courage that it took from our indigenous neighbors and friends who first settled these lands, to the explorers and adventurers that came after and created a nation. It is looking at this complicated and fantastic story of America and leaning into the innovation and the spirit of adventure and the entrepreneurialism that only exists in this vibrant democracy. Ideas, news move, this from CNN, right? News moves from east to west and ideas move from west to east. And so this is the beginning, Medora, of the great American West, and that spirit of adventure and innovation that lives. So we'll also be having a pretty incredible drone show. We're going to have Theodore Roosevelt's life in the night sky, all that big sky over Montana and the Badlands lit up with his story. He had that great quote, "Keep your eyes on the stars and your feet on the ground." Well, this is going to be, eyes on the stars for TR's life in the sky.
Well, thanks so much for sharing the inside look at the exciting new library, and also congratulations on the book. It's great to reconnect with you, and thanks for coming to Now It's History.
Excellent. Great to be with you, Rich. Good to see you. Thank you.
Okay. Take care.
All right. You too.